You're a lot chirpier now you've all got a beer in your hand than you were when I did a talk at 9 o'clock this morning when you all had coffees in your hand. This is much, much better. So I should warn you before we get into this that we're going to talk about threats and stuff, and I'm an Englishman holding a microphone fighting the urge to sing you a Beatles song. We're probably going to talk about threats and stuff, and so there's a good chance that I might say adversary. And I just want everybody to understand that I'm an Englishman, and that's how this language is supposed to sound, right? So it's not adversary, it's proper English. Okay, so we'll crack into this because there's been a lot of questions today, a lot of interaction, and we're hoping to keep that going. So just real fast, I'm Daniel Clayton. I'm the VP of Cybersecurity Services and Support at Bitdefender. I'm old and crusty. I've been doing this for a long time. Cut my teeth about 30 years ago with NSA. But what we'll do is we'll hand it off to the panel and we'll let them introduce themselves one at a time, and then we'll get into some questions. So let's start down the end of our keynote speaker, Ben.
This one actually work? All right. Let's see. So Benjamin Corll, I am the CISO for Coates Group. Anything else I need?
Whatever you feel is important.
I'm not singing a Beatles song, but...
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anthony Foust. I am the global CISO for Belron. For those of you who don't know that, we're Belron. We trade under several different brands. We're headquartered in London, so I live here in Raleigh, but I actually work out of London. You know us in the U.S. as Safelite Auto Glass.
Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm not sure what time zone I'm in, but my name is Gina Yacone. I am the Mountain State Region CISO for a company called Trace3. A lot of people know that as a VAR. I have two areas of practice. One is our go-to-market, so all you vendors out there, I might be your barrier to getting into being one of our partners. The other aspect is compliance for the Mountain State regions. So glad to be here. I live in Denver.
She just moved. She was here in Cary. Good afternoon. I'm Nicole. I'm the Chief Information Officer over at Town of Cary.
The best town.
Okay, jolly good. Thank you very much, guys. That's super helpful. So we'll crack on with it. Cybersecurity, as we know, as everybody knows here, right, is one of the fastest moving, most complex industries that's out there at the moment. And consequently, the role of a CISO is one of the fastest moving, one of the most quickly developing, and one of those demanding roles that are out there. Now, I'd like to hear a little bit from each one of the CISOs, how they kind of approach the role. But I'm also interested, there's two kind of streams of thought that I hear a lot. One is that CISOs need to be business leaders and that they need to get much better at communicating with the board, speaking the language of business and all of those things. And I hear that a lot when I speak to CISOs and when I speak to business leaders at conferences like these. But if you go on Twitter and you speak to the InfoSec community, what you hear all the time is that CISOs aren't technical enough and they're not security practitioners and they don't really understand a lot of what it is they're trying to achieve. So I'm interested to hear from each of you, how do you approach the role and what kind of school of thought do you subscribe to? And because it's easy, we'll start down the end with Ben again.
No, so the role of CISO, I will lean towards the more business. I've got to engage with other business leaders. I've got to be able to sell my program to them. I do not need to sell my ideas, designs, architecture. I have people that are far smarter than me that work for me. So I don't need to sell technical things to the IT organization. I do need to engage with the other business leaders and help them understand the reason why we're building the programs that we are. So I do believe that the CISO has to have business chops. Having started in technology and have been a technologist for many, many years, I can put the other hat on, but I do not believe you will be successful as a CISO if you cannot speak to the business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, CISOs are being pushed more and more towards boards and having that independent line. So I have an independent line to the board of directors in addition to reporting to the CIO. You cannot survive in this environment unless you have those business skills and being able to translate a lot of the technical components to your board of directors, to your business leaders on that front. It is helpful, and I do think it's also required, as in everything in life, there is a healthy balance to be struck here. You have to understand the subject matter that you're responsible for, and I think cybersecurity and privacy, which I both own today, you have to have a contextual knowledge of what that is. There is a lot of risk you're taking on your shoulders as a CISO for an organization, and so you need to have an understanding of what is that risk, how do you quantify that risk, is what you're being told correct, and how are you properly translating that to a board of directors that may be very low in understanding what you're communicating.
Awesome. I couldn't agree more with both of you. I think from my perspective, being a woman in cybersecurity, I've had to learn the technical, where I get beat up a lot. So luckily my first job in cybersecurity was building a SOC from the ground up and ripping and replacing a SIM twice and threat intelligence program. So, but how I approach leadership in general is basically how Ted Lasso does. So if you guys have watched Ted Lasso, I'm very much the Ted Lasso of cybersecurity. Open door, team environment, open and honest communications. Nobody wants to talk about cybersecurity, okay? It's about risk, it's about, things that people think that they're doing wrong. It's about potentially losing their job. And, for me, it's making sure that the team knows that I'm there for them. I have an open door, and that I understand where they're coming from, what do they need to overcome. So I think for me, leadership, I have to be a little bit quirky because I'm a woman in cybersecurity as well. So it's been a great road. So I do take the approach of having an open door, being a team spirit, but I couldn't agree more with understanding the technical aspects. I get to play naive a lot and be able to ask some dumb questions, even though I might know those answers. But business perspective, I have 14 years of legal, so I get to talk about risk all day from a business perspective. So I think having a good legal background or a business background helps having conversations in the boardroom or at the stakeholder level. And of course, like Ted Lasso, you have to have it as a user level. So you have to be able to speak at all levels of the organization.
I was just waiting for you to say, be a goldfish. I think you guys all nailed it. But when we talk about business skills, for me, very specifically, it's communication, right? It all comes down to communication, especially, I think, in a government environment, and being able to relay the importance of security to every level of person in an organization. So that's from our folks that are in the field, picking up the trash, making sure it's clean, our garbage, recycling collectors, all the way to our finance and CFO. So you've got this vast range of folks that have really any type of computer knowledge in general. So if we have to be very clear and very specific in how we communicate in a meaning and a way that everyone can understand. We do lots of training, but I think for us, in terms of our security folks, it really comes down to their ability to articulate in a way that everyone in the organization can understand.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we have to be able to go up and down the leash, right? We've got to be able to talk to leaders and make them understand the risk and a lot of the time what it is they're paying for and the reason that we're asking money. But it's also a real challenge when you're asking developers or engineers to do something that they don't want to do, because it's making their job a little bit harder. So being able to go down the leash and then talk on their level as to what they're doing and why it's a risk is really useful as well. So before we leave the subject of the role itself, I just want to click in a little bit on this idea that it changes a lot. Like we've seen a bunch of presentations today, mine included, where we talked about the evolution of IT and the way that's changing security over time. And there's big changes that we're seeing as we move from kind of on-prem traditional infrastructure to cloud and microservices and all of those things. But then there's also like paradigm shifts all the time in the way that we think about risk and the way that we think about security and proactive security and zero trust and all of those things as well. So I'm just wondering your perspectives on how much attention you pay to all that, and as the roles changing around you, how much attention do you pay for that? How do you deal with that level of change? Nicole, we'll start with you and go back the other way.
That was a lot.
My team says that if speaking
I'm like-
were an Olympic sport, I could speak for England.
Yeah, I mean, I think like everything, right? There's always change, and I think adoption for us specifically, and getting folks to understand the importance of change and what it means to them. Sometimes, security is like, it's like this invisible thing until something really bad happens. And so, like a simple example is when you are trying to implement something as simple as multi-factor authentication, and you're trying to do that with your counsel, and then you're trying to do it up and down the organization, becomes a challenge, right? Because for us, it's just normal process, like it's really quick, easy, I get it. But explaining that and then implementing it, and why do I have to do an extra step, can be a challenge. I think as technology changes, I think things will become easier and it'll become a little bit more invisible. So for trying to explain and teach, I think, is a lot of our role. So when we talk about change, for us, it's talking about it's going to change. Like, this is today, but tomorrow it may be something different, and that's the norm. Because I think sometimes people think it's going to stay the same way, but we're going to implement something else tomorrow, and it will impact everyone.
So for me, I look at cybersecurity news every day. I look at threat intelligence every day. The threat landscape is evolving, technology is evolving. Yes, we have brilliance in the basics in terms of certain types of best practices in certain different domains. But for me, I have to stay innovative and look at innovative technologies. I read different frameworks like, the zero trust architecture, seeing what the different pillars are to make that up. What does SASE really mean, and what does that actually mean to different organizations, including my own? Trying to define, what is true business cases, true use cases, and really trying to make sure that you have the people, processes, and technology to implement that. I've definitely have seen a trend, definitely in the past year, where a lot of companies are starting to get a little bit sticker shock with the cost of cloud, and just the cost of doing business and staying relevant. I've seen with, of course, the war, Putin's war, I'm going to call it. Russian people, I didn't think wanted that, but Putin's war, a lot of people are thinking about coming back to traditional infrastructure, and maybe bringing it back in-house. So I always think there's some old networking guys out there kind of laughing at all of us going, ha, 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 told you not to go in the cloud, right? Right now, we're going to have a hybrid, I think. But I talk about zero trust probably every week, or SASE in some capacity, and I'm still learning and evolving on that. So I have to stay relevant, I have to evolve, so I kind of expect my team to as well.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say different to that is you have to, if you're in this space, noise is your friend, right? There's just so much noise and distraction out there. And I think what sets it apart is it has to be very contextual. You have to be plugged into your organization. You have to be plugged into your shareholders or your stakeholders or your executives, and understand what their top concerns are and how you are addressing them within your subject matter expertise and what you can offer to the organization overall. So I would say above that, yes, you're doing your typical things as a CISO. You're plugging in, seeing what's trending, coming into the technology landscape, what's happening in the legal landscape, right? There's some very interesting things that are happening now with the CISO role evolving potentially from a regulatory standpoint. So you have to keep your pulse on all of those, coming to events like this, talking to your peers, but most importantly, it's just not a one-size-fits-all. What works for the SMB market versus Fortune 500, you have to have the pulse of the organization and figure out what makes the most sense and what's the organization capable of doing or ingesting as you're building that maturity.
I really don't know what else to add here. But I think the thing, as the more I'm listening, the more I'm learning, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's through attending events, whether it's the newsworthy things that then I'm being asked about inside my organization, the so what factor. What about this thing? So what? What if that happens here? What would the impact be for our business? It would, based on what we know, we believe it would be minimal. So even though it was catastrophic for somebody else, always need to take that step back and say, okay, would it be so bad for us? So what? Okay, if that were to happen, would we be okay? Would we be resilient enough? So it's always just don't get lost, don't get in panic, take a step back and say, okay, we're going to make it through this as well. But you always got to keep your ear to the ground, learning new things, and just keeping that open mindset.
So generally, stay informed, keep half an eye on what's going on out there, but we know the fundamentals and don't get distracted from it. Okay? I should apologize as well. I'm going up and down the line, but that's because I've got one microphone. So if I suddenly jump to the middle, life's going to get really complicated for all of us, right? So we're just going to keep doing that. That's how it's going to work. So there were some questions earlier, and I see CISOs get asked all the time this question about, or not so much from CISOs, but boards are always complaining that CISOs don't know how to communicate with them. They don't, and we hear this all the time. But I think it's true the other way around. I hear from CISOs all the time, hey, the board just doesn't get it. The ELT just doesn't get it. They don't really understand the risk. They don't understand the risk to their brand. All of those things. So I think it would be really useful just to talk through some of the tactics and the techniques that you guys have used that have been successful in communicating risk up. Ben.
Absolutely. No, and it's really just, find out what language your board members speak. What is their background? What, you find those that have finance backgrounds, they're going to understand risk. So you can break things down. I really just try to, again, figure out how to communicate with them, the language that they understand, and then use my analogies there. I shared that earlier as well. And I just find that to be more beneficial. And then I try to anticipate the types of questions that they have asked in the past. They're going to ask me again that the next time. I will record the questions they ask me. Therefore, I'm like, okay, likely this is going to be the same type of questions. And then I make sure that I prep an answer for that before I go in there. So I want to be prepared and speak in the language and in the areas that they're likely to come from. That's where I start.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a challenge. I would say there are days where I feel like Edison, where I found 10,000 ways that don't work, and you just kind of learn from that. And I think that's going to be ever evolving depending on where you are on your cybersecurity journey. One things I do think that are common threads that I see work the most, maturity scales. What I find with boards and stakeholders is they always want to see how they stack up to other companies similar size and scale, right? So when you can bring that context and data into the conversation, I think that lands really well. They just want to know that they're in the middle of that bell curve, right? So that they don't look egregiously irresponsible in this space, but they also don't want to be overspending or overinvesting for little return. So you're trying to strike a nice sweet spot there, and anything you can do to help on that, I think, just lends well to resonating how well we're doing and where we should be going, in any way to quantify that. If anybody has figured out the way to consistently quantify risk contextual to an organization, then certainly you better be patenting that method as quickly as possible. But other than that, I mean, those are the things. It's just trial and error, and don't be in a fixed mindset with it. What may be working for the first couple of years of a program may be a report that I just want to shred and never want them to see again, right? And don't bring vulnerabilities into the mix. It's like trying to tell them how many stars there are in the galaxy when you see numbers like that. It's just, don't do that mistake, please.
I think I'm going to approach this from a different angle. I think we're doing it wrong. I don't think we know how to communicate. I don't think we know how to measure. I also, I've been researching metrics and measures a lot. It's in my master's for cybersecurity. I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been reporting to boards in different capacities. We don't have the right data, or it's incomplete, or our SIM is overtuned or undertuned. So the data that we're getting isn't even correct data. So It's hard. It really is hard. I don't know the secret sauce. I'm trying to figure that out and write a book about it. But it'll be on shelves in 2024, 25.5. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe. But no, we don't have correct data. So how can we truly measure our program? So even if you have great controls in the CIS Critical 20 or NIST or ISO, whatever your controls are, you know, and you're trying to measure that control based on inadequate data, and then you're reporting that up, you know, it's a difficult position to be in. So what I've been doing and the approach I've been taking, and I guess this is twofold. One is what you report to the board is different than what people need to be reporting to you. Okay, so it's two different conversations. So regarding metrics and measures though, you know, I want to be in phases. Okay, I don't ever want to get caught in, this is my program overall. We're in phase 1 of my program. We're in phase 2. We're going to be in a phase 100. Because we're always evolving. We're going to have better statistics, maybe better data, or maybe inadequate data. So what I'm reporting on to people, I don't want to be caught with that. So I always say, try to figure out what your controls are for phase 1. I don't want to say master it, because you won't master it, but figure out what your controls are for phase 2, maybe phase 3. Phase 4 is unknown, I don't know. And the departments that roll up will help you kind of look at that data differently. What you report to the board, they definitely, you know, what Ben said today during his keynote, they look at the Wall Street Journal, they look at the New York Times, they look at breaches, they ask you about that. They want to know compliance. Are you in compliance? Are you out of compliance? And also, though, you know, they do want to know certain threats to their vertical. They want to know how they stack up, which you're never going to be able to tell them, really. But you want to just be have your elevator pitch for them and think about measures and metrics a little bit differently. I hope you do after this conversation, and come talk to me about it, because I am geeking out on that topic right now.
You cracked me up. Yeah. Well, in the data is interesting too, because I think when you're reporting up, how do you normalize the data, right? Like, so what's a normal threshold? Like, it has no, I don't know that it has any meaning often to board. They're like, okay, those are numbers. I don't know, is that good, bad? I think that, you know, we all talked about it. I think it's communication and education. There is no better way than trying to educate. I think it's a very difficult topic to kind of get your hands around. I'm gonna tell you, for me, here's one of the things that happened for us. Is our CEO, is also our town manager. His wife works at another municipality, and they had a breach, and she was impacted. So for me, that was the best thing that could have ever happened to our security plan, because all of a sudden it was like, oh, it's real, like it's a real thing, it happened. Not ideal, but that it's true. So. That is ideal. Ideal for me, yeah.
They want to know how other verticals are stacking up.
So I think those were, honestly, some of the most insightful and honest ways I've ever seen this question answered before, right? The two default questions, or the two default answers to this question tend to be, keep it really, really simple, go in there with a traffic light system, tell the board we're red, amber, or green. And then the other way of doing it is talk about metrics. And then we all go in there and talk about vulnerabilities, and they all get their phones out. And because the numbers are so huge that it doesn't mean anything to them. So I think, you know, everybody's right, really, in what they're saying here. I fundamentally agree with you that we're not doing it properly, right? We haven't really found as an industry a way of making it work. One thing I'll share really quick, something that I found that works really, I'm not on the panel, but anyway, something that I found works really well for me is don't be a cost center, right? If all you are is a cost center, they get fed up writing blank checks for you. So whenever you can find a way of showing a win, whenever you can find a way of showing, hey, that money that we spent, here's what it did. Here's how it reduced our attack surface, whatever it may be. But anything that you can do that shows the value that you delivered to the business with the money that you spent seems to be really well received and makes them a little bit more open to writing another check the next time you ask. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. So we'll change tack a little bit now. We've been talking about very CISO-y things, very leadery type things that we all have to deal with. Let's talk a little bit about threats. The two big threats really of the last 12 months, the two biggest threats probably that are keeping the audience up at night are probably supply chain issues and ransomware. So let's talk a little bit about how is that impacting you guys and your planning, and what is it that you're doing about those two issues, and we'll start at this end this time.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, I think it's an issue we all talk about every day, right? As do I have the answers? No. For us, we've been adding to staff, right? So we're a municipality, we don't have a ton of money. I think everyone can understand that, but we do look at additional resources, whether we're going to start to manage service some things, whether we bring in different resources to kind of cover everything. Lots of internal training as well. That's been huge for us. And it's, I think, and I'm sure everyone does this, and we do. It's like that once a year type training that everyone does. But now we're more into a training program, trying to figure out how to make sure we're educating people all the time, and that there is some type of repercussion actually on the other end on some of the things. So, I mean, that's really how we're handling it. And again, we also, in terms of our people, we make sure that whatever is in the news gets out to the whole organization almost every day. And it's not to scare people, but it's really in an awareness. And we've seen a lot of response from, folks in the town that have asked a lot of questions, and that's what we want them to do. So
both these topics are top of mind always. Ransomware, it's just one click away. Supply chain, I mean, we had SolarWinds, we got Microsoft, we got just any virus that's potentially out there or vulnerability. We think about secure coding practices. A lot of coders, they've got ugly code, right? And we don't have a proper dev SDLC process, and thinking about that aspect of things. Supply chain is keeping me more up at night than ransomware. So for me, thinking about the architecture of the network is probably the biggest thing, and thinking about that from a 1 to 3 to 5 year plan, right? So do we have microsegmentation? Can we shut down an endpoint if malware starts traversing the network? What also are our vendors, what are we giving them access to? Like, so for example, with SolarWinds, it might have been pointing at, all the stack, but it was in not just read, it was in read-write. So thinking about what kind of identity and access control we're giving to our vendors. Of course, from a legal perspective, are we doing our vendor due diligence? Those sad questionnaires that people have to figure out. Now, granted, when you're doing those vendor due diligence questionnaires, make sure it's not just templated answers coming back to you, but the answers that are coming back to you address your network, right? So how is that organization addressing your network compared to maybe other customers that they're serving? So I think, though, it's also bringing in smarter people than I to think about architecture differently, and thinking about what is the obstacles in their way, and from an architecture standpoint, a tool standpoint, or whatever that is. Do we need to throw more people on helping with doing microsegmentation or adapting a new endpoint solution? So but those are two big issues for me, is thinking about it that way.
Yeah, I think for the ransomware piece, simulation. If you're not doing tabletop simulations, if you're not doing any kind of variation of simulation with the ransomware or supply chain attack topic, you need to do that now. The research will tell you over and over, you have a 30% reduction in the cost of recovery if you already have simulated through this. Your boards know the decisions, they know the policies, right? Yeah, and you need to be doing that not just with your teams, but with your executives and your boards and your third parties involved in those simulations. Most of your cyber insurance providers will do and host them for you, sometimes at no cost to you. So there should be no excuse for most of you in here for not be doing tabletop simulations regularly. And don't just do the checkbox annual, do it as frequently and often as you think you can do it. The other thing on the supply chain risk, stop just doing checkbox procedures for SOC 2 review reports. Do they have it or do they not for your third party risk management? If you're not putting investments into your third-party risk management, then you're just as culpable to supply chain risk. It is our responsibility for the organization that we have proper processes, we're properly reviewing the most critical vendors in that third-party risk management program. If you don't have one, you should be talking to your executives right now about how you start it up. If you don't own it, it's got to be internal audit, or it's got to be some other function in the organization. How are we looking at this as an organization? And you have to read those SOC 2s and then follow it up with those critical vendors and say, I saw this on your SOC 2 report. What are you doing? What have you done since? What investments are you making? You have every right as a customer to ask that. I don't care if it's Microsoft, Amazon, SolarWinds, doesn't matter. Ask the questions, be engaged with your suppliers, especially your critical ones.
Really? Really? I mean, you stole everything. So the last bit is thinking with the ransomware, thinking about with the supply chain, just thinking about the points of entry. Where is this going to come at? Do I have adequate controls that are going to be there? Thinking about ransomware, how's it going to be delivered? Is it going to be delivered via email? If so, all right, how does our email protection look? Is it going to be delivered from a USB drive that's been dropped in the parking lot? Okay, do you allow USB mass storage devices and auto run to be out there? Same thing now when you're breaking down for your supply chain of what type of access, how do they get access? Are we allowing their devices on our network? Do we just give them a virtual desktop so they come in? So our tools, our logging, all of those things are in place. So the only other thing from what's already been added is thinking about where that entry point would be. Do I have visibility? Do I have protection? And what can I do about it to minimize the risk?
Excellent. So just real fast, by show of hands, how many of you are doing tabletops with your teams? Yeah, really, really low. It's a great point the panel made. I would definitely encourage you guys to do it. Two biggest mistakes made in panels. First mistake is don't confine it to the incident response team. Right? Any incident, any company level incident is going to involve corporate comms, the leadership team, it's going to involve legal. There's all sorts of things that have to come together to deal with an incident when it happens. So if you're going to tabletop, don't just bring the IR team in. It's a company level event. And the other mistake that everybody makes is that you involve the managers. The managers will know what the process is because they wrote them. Exclude those guys and see what their teams do when the shit hits the fan, right? And that's really where you're going to see how effective the team is at operating when in a tabletop situation. That's when you're really going to learn the lessons and be able to improve the situation. So just ransomware is really big, right? I mean, it's massive at the moment. It's one of the fastest evolving attack vectors that we see. Ransomware started off as a pretty straightforward attack, and then people started getting careful about their backups, and then the ransomware started encrypting online backups. And we're at a point now where ransomware groups are now looking online before they encrypt your data for your cybersecurity policy, your insurance policy, so that they can understand how much you're insured for, so that they can expedite the whole process and make a demand that they know that you can pay, right? So it's something that's evolving all the time. So I'm interested with you guys, where do you sit on the whole pay the ransom or don't pay the ransom question?
Not my call. I mean, really, this is a business decision. I don't want to support it. I don't want to pay it. I want to make sure that the controls that we have in place, that our backups are there, that I can do restoration. But the other aspect that ransomware has out there now is they're not just taking the data and encrypted, they're stealing your data as well. So they're exfiltrating that. So it's now not just ransom, but it's extortion. So either you're going to pay this ransom or we're going to upload this to the dark web. We're going to tell all these newspapers you're still going to be front page news. The problem is, they're not going to delete that data. They've already gotten it. So, and by the time they're encrypting it, your data's already been stolen. So you need to have your monitoring to make sure that these large data exfiltrations are going to be flagged because that's when that ransomware is actually starting. They may not have touched the system and encrypted it yet, but that's where it's already starting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree it's probably not a CISO's call, but the reality is organizations are not perfect, right? They're all on a journey. And the first place that they're going to look to is the IT and say, can we recover, right? And a lot of times they're probably not going to like the answer, right? So I think when it comes to the pay, don't pay, I tend to be very open about it. I don't think we should be legislating against it right now because, again, organizations are not perfect and these organizations need to survive. And if they're prevented from paying ransoms, and it's an unfortunate market circumstance that has arisen because of lack of investment in this area, then they need that freedom right now to do that. Do we get to a point eventually where more regulatory and legislative processes are in place that force boards and organizations to have the proper attention and investment strategies behind cybersecurity and privacy? Yes, and then at that point, then maybe legislation about paying or not paying and killing this market once and for all will be more appropriate. But I think at this point where ransomware is, where organizations are in their journey, I think you have to have the freedom, and IT is going to have to be really armed with the knowledge about if we're hit in this spot at this time on this day, we got to pay the ransom, but on Tuesday, March 3rd, we don't have to pay it.
Your insurance might not pay.
That's
No,
a good point.
so the other part is you need to talk to your legal team because if you do actually pay the ransom, your cyber insurance may be invalidated as well. So once again, this is a business decision where you need to be involving other people of what would be the implications if we do this. What is the timing that is there as well? So be very careful when you're making these decisions, which is why it needs to be decision by committee on this type of conversation or decision.
Sorry, I don't even capitalize on this, but the other thing too that I would add onto that, which is a good trigger point, is no matter what, you get the local authorities involved. I don't care what the ransomware people say, you get the local authorities involved because you don't want to commit any kind of crime within the jurisdiction that you may be operating with, especially in foreign transactions. Most of these are done through Bitcoin. So there's a whole procedural for this, and there are a lot of bigger experts out there that know how to do this the right way, know how to negotiate it. There's a whole market in that space. The other thing, too, is if you don't already have an existing relationship with your local authorities, the FBI, the NCSC, whatever that is for the jurisdictions that you operate in, you call up that local office as soon as possible. There's one thing I would implore you to do if you don't already have liaison contacts with those offices. Do that. Get them on. They were more than happy to meet with you. I meet with our local FBI offices in Columbus, Ohio, Raleigh, London with the NCSC regularly. It is important because when that does happen, not if, when an incident happens, ransomware or otherwise, they will be an important ally to give you the right intel about that group. Guaranteed they know a lot more about that criminal element threatening you at that moment than you'll ever know. And they'll know if you pay the ransom, they're still going to sell it to the dark web. Or they pay the ransom and they actually are honorable and they won't release the data.
So I don't want to repeat what was said because that was awesome in many different ways. So I'm going to try to take it as more of a to-do list type of scenario. Local authorities, your insurance company, all of those people should be in your incident response plan and contact list. That's a must. That's like a bare minimum. If you don't have that now, get the hell out of here and put it in your plan tomorrow, okay? You should know those, field offices' phone numbers. You should know your insurance company's phone numbers. You should have legal's cell phone on hand. So that's definitely something that you must do at a bare minimum. The other to do is, and you alluded to it, is there are companies that help you mediate with ransomware actors or APTs, whether that be a nation state or organized crime group. So that's what they do for a living. They also have the intelligence behind it to say, is it potentially a double extortion or are they just coming in for a quick buck? So they can give you some intelligence if you don't per se want to bring in an FBI or something like that, because maybe legal's server got corrupted and maybe the FBI doesn't want to come in. I'm not sure. So that's a business decision, right? Again, that's a business decision if you're bringing in the FBI or you're bringing in a mediator. But that's something you should do, though, is talk to organizations and vendors that are out there that do this type of remediation. Also, have a Bitcoin wallet, right? Or all organizations should just have it as a just in case. It's not like something that happens overnight, so it's something you should do. Immutable backups, they're important. Backups in general are important. So know your, backup plan. I liked that. On March 3rd, we'll be good, but yesterday, no, we couldn't back up right away. So that is important to know. But knowing your backup cadence and how fast you recover, that's back to incident response testing and planning. What does that look like? If you can't do it at your site, there are sites that actually will do full interruption testing and see what your backups look like and those types of testing things. So that's a good investment because you'll know if you should pay or not. And that's it. Those are my to-do list. You're welcome.
I think you guys covered it all, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's much like anything else. I think until it happens, you never really know, right? So I can say yes or I can say no, but until it actually happens, I don't know. But I do think, like you guys said, it's really all about preparation, right? Making sure you're having discussions, walk through scenarios with the right people, go through your lists. To me, it's really about making sure that this is, like, when it happens, this isn't like the first time anyone has ever thought about what happens if there's a breach, right? And I think that happens a lot, by the way. Like, it's not going to happen to me. So it is all about preparation.
Absolutely. So I think for everybody in the audience, the takeaway there is that it's a business decision, right? It's not a security decision, it's a business decision, but that decision has to be taken in the context of if you do pay the ransom, there's a very good chance that you're still going to get hurt. There's a very good chance that you're going to, I think there's something like an 80% re-ransom rate, where once you pay a ransom, everybody knows that you'll pay the ransom, so they come and hit you again. So you've got to make that decision with all of the information. Right, so we're getting close to the end, and we want to make sure that there is time for questions. Just real fast, how many CISOs have we got? Or how many people who are playing the role of a CISO, either formally or informally, in the audience? By a show of hands. And about 5 or 6 or 7 is on, sort of. And so of you guys, how many of you felt that you were properly prepared and trained for the role before you took it on? None. Yeah, that's what I was expecting. Right, so I think the CISO is a role. We've already talked about the fact that it's evolving really quickly, that it's changing all the time. There was a conversation earlier about companies don't even know where it lives organizationally, right? It's different in different companies. So there's a lot of unknowns about the role. I thought it would be useful if we just talked, if you guys just share one thing that you've learned, one big lesson that you've learned in the role that you think is valuable for budding CISOs and for CISOs who are listening to us today. In any order you like.
What's the biggest lesson I've learned?
Yes.
Don't be an ostrich. Be a goldfish. Communication. Pivot. Like, be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, I don't know, make that your zone. I'm not perfect. I say a lot. I put my foot in my mouth. And that's what makes me great, okay? So, just put yourself out there. Be afraid to, mess up in front of the board. You don't have to be perfect. So I think it's with me, it's really, I don't want to say, I don't care anymore. I want to do what's best, and as long as I sleep at night thinking I did a good job today, and I'm trying my best to communicate and keep a good team spirit and keep my SOC analyst employed, because they're always burnt out. I think that's important. So I think for me, it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Sorry, that was the answer.
So this is going to sound a little odd, but I think you should take a moment to spend some time with some salespeople, because you've got to figure out how to get them to yes, right? I think often security folks are very into the details and the technical. We talked about the communication, but I don't always sense they're like, it's almost like it's okay if we say, well, no, we're not going to fund that. Like, no, it's really not, right? So you've got to figure out a way to get us to say yes, right? And be able to explain the importance in a way that it's going to make sense. So for me, I was like, go work with the salesperson for a little while. Get us, figure out those negotiation skills. Figure out how to get us to say yes.
Beyond that, probably the two that come top to mind for me: take care of your people, right? Be a good leader. No assholes allowed, right? That's actually one of our company cultural mottos. And then I think the other thing too is, and we run into this a lot in security, and I see CISOs fall into this trap a lot, which is they get so bogged down to seeing a problem or a risk everywhere that they're paralyzed in their ability to act, right? Any one of us can sit here and armchair quarterback anybody else's actions very, very easily, right? What's the role you're gonna play? Great, I see a risk in that chair, the leg is bent, for instance. Great, what am I doing? Am I gonna come over there and help you make sure that chair stays supported? Am I gonna give you a warning about it, right? Me just sitting here pointing that out does nothing, right, to address the risk or to address the problem. So trying to infuse a culture of a solution mindset, what role are you going to contribute to that, is better than the CISO who just goes around and just points at everybody and says, you guys are all wrong, right?
All right, my two is do not be afraid to say, I don't know. We are looked at as subject matter experts, experts in our areas. We want to be able to answer the questions, but being able to say, I don't know, is very powerful. And I find you will be more well respected to say, I don't know, especially if you go find the answer and come back. So being able to say, I don't know, and then being able to say no. Delegate, handing things over. You do not have to do everything yourself. Trusting other people, it may be done the other way, and the other way is just fine. It doesn't always have to be my way. So being able to say no or delegating things as well. So those are the two things that I would share.
I love those. I think they're really good. I'm just going to add a really quick one. It was similar to yours, Anthony. But like what I would say is I've been running security teams for a long time. I guarantee you there is no team in your company that works harder than the security team. So I would urge you to make sure that they know that you know how hard they're working. Okie dokie. Right, so that takes us to the end of the set questions that I had. We leaves us about 15 minutes for questions.
I have some virtual questions. Can I bring our virtual people into this? Yes. So we want to make sure we include our virtual people out there. We appreciate you guys being with us. So one of the questions Tyler B had is, how do you handle rejection when you're working to get funding and critical risk security projects or initiatives? Any tips?
So, I mean, you're not always going to have success. It's not going to happen. And something that Daniel alluded to earlier, and I wanted to circle back on it. I think this is a great time to do it. When you're thinking about cost and your organization, your most coveted assets, your critical assets. So think about it from a application security. Say you're a company that builds applications, and that generates your most revenue. Okay, that's the thing that you're protecting. You want to be able to talk about that one profit, if it's a division, if it's a product, if it's something, you want to tie it back to that to try to get buy-in. So one of the things is if you can say, hey, you know, this is how much we profit, if it's 100,000, a million, or a billion, you know, you want to say, to be able to prioritize that first and be able to say your reasoning behind that. The other thing that I would say to get buy-in is do a tabletop exercise. You know, keep it simple. You know, think about, I don't want to say a scare tactic because that's not it, but a lot of times users, from end user to key stakeholders, they don't really know what security does. They don't know what IT does. They don't know the level of effort that's involved if there's a security breach. So as such, by including them, they can kind of see the people, the processes and technology behind it. So you can actually get their buy-in, and you can actually see it, especially if you bring in legal, or that system owner whose blood, sweat, and tears has been, trying to maintain it, or that software developer or builder that it's called, who's building that application and would be devastated if it broke. So you can put the people behind, the cost as well. And so I think that's one way that I would do it.
Yeah, I guess I have a hard time with the word rejection. I think that if you're coming at it from a point and you get a rejection, then probably the way you went about it in the first place was the wrong path, right? You didn't bring enough people along in the journey. You didn't listen to the feedback that you were receiving. Things are about timing. I have my current boss, hopefully he's not watching because I don't want to get him in trouble, but he always says, don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? So timing, to your point, I think is really critical in that piece. And then trying to figure out how are you bringing others along the journey, and don't come at it with a fixed mindset. If you come into it like, we need a SIM, that's it. And if we don't have it, we can't have an effective cybersecurity program. Yeah, you're going to get rejected every time on that one, or almost every time. Don't come at it like that. Come at it and say, this is what I think we need and this is why, and let's bring those along the journey. You may find at the end of the day, maybe it's a third party. Maybe you have an existing tool that can already be leveraged. Be open in that process. I think rejection becomes less and less part of your vernacular or your experience within an organization if you can look at it more holistically.
Any more? We can go on to another question, or if anyone's got anything to add, we can add it. No, it was.
If they have any questions, can you give them the mic?
Certainly. Anything to shut me up, right, Kim?
My question is regarding work-life balance. Did you have better work-life balance before becoming CISO or after?
Well, I'll open this because I'm on this journey myself. But personally, I have not had a good relationship with work in my professional life, and I have 4 young boys, and so I get it. I think the term that better resonates with me is more about work-life integration, right? That's probably the big trendy thing that you're hearing now, and it actually resonates with me, right? So, for instance, I'm training for a half marathon right now, right? So, because of that, right, if I have let's say I didn't get up early enough because I was up late for some other thing that was going on, I work across basically 6 different time zones, right? So as a result of that, depending on how my day is, depending on my meeting schedule is, if something opens up or a meeting cancels for 2 hours, I'm gonna go get my training run in, right? And then I'm gonna come back and still work probably another 3-4 hours. So that's a skill that I think we're all gonna have to have. I think it's a necessity when, in a global world, it's more prominent for me in terms of daily schedule, but just in cybersecurity in general, it is a 24/7, 365 job. Nobody cares that it's Memorial Day on Monday, right? Think about Christmas with Log4j. Did they think about anybody's holiday plans on that front? I had my entire SOC team, working over the holidays. Most of us probably in this room did, right? So you're going to have to integrate that. And that point about taking care of people is, don't do it just for yourself. Force your team to do the same thing, right? If you know you're working them hard over the holidays, for instance, make sure they're taking their time, right? That's the most important thing. Anybody else?
No, and it also comes down to prioritization. I know that if I don't block time on my calendar, it will be blocked for me. So if I know that my son is a soccer game at 4:30, I know that at 4 o'clock I've got to block time off so I can drive to that soccer game. I know that I'm going to be there for 2 hours, and then when I come home, I'm going to work for the next 2 to 3. So there will always be flexible time. He understands that if something breaks, I might not be able to be there, but I'm going to be there for him as much as I can because I am going to dedicate that time. So prioritize that. Put it on your calendar. Make time for it. And then set expectations. So if people, I cover, way too many time zones as well. Hong Kong, Philippines, U.S. and Europe and all of that. Set expectations and to ask questions of, do you need me in front of a computer? Yes or no? Okay, I'm going to be driving. I'm going to be walking my dog. I'm going to be at the park with my kids. I will be on the call. I'll be in listen-only mode because you tell me you just need me to be there. So ask the questions, set expectations, and just have these types of conversations would be my recommendation.
I'm going to be very vulnerable with you. You're welcome. I wasn't kind to myself during COVID. Not at all. Not at all. I gained 40 pounds. Isolation was not kind to me. I'm a huge extrovert. So for me, work-life balance, I worked harder. I was definitely in a lot more meetings. I was definitely always on camera because I just needed people. So for me, it's very difficult, especially I've sacrificed so much of my life to get to this position. I don't have a family. I put career first for a very long time. And it may be too late for me to have a family, and that's okay, but because the next 40 years are going to be excellent, because I've made it. But I put education and my work first, and I'm hoping to find that balance. I haven't heard work-life integration yet, so I wrote that down. So that's actually a cool buzzword that I didn't know. I'm the hardest on myself, and most likely you guys are too. You know, I think we're the hardest on ourselves, and I think we have to give ourselves permission. For me, it'll be the next couple of months to get my health back in order, but to give ourselves permission to have a better work-life balance. And I definitely appreciate the question. So,
yeah, it's a great point, Gina, because this integration, because I use the same thing. I love this whole work-life integration because I think about too. Growing up, I had 3 kids back to back, right? And trying to come up the ranks and becoming a CIO, put career first. And as you guys talk about, trying to get to the soccer game, for me it was hockey, but trying to get wherever was a nightmare. I had no work-life balance. This whole integrated thing, I've become healthier because I do calls while walking the dog, right? And can able to be more with my family and be more present. Do I work longer hours? Maybe. Because I feel like I'm working all the time, but I definitely have those spots. I'm like, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to go for a walk, going to see my kids. So I'm like 1,000,000% for this integration. But that's just me. As opposed to the way it was before, I think it was just all work.
I'm a bit concerned about this work-life integration thing. If I tell my wife that, I think she might injure herself with the eye roll that follows with the... Look, I think it's a really stressful job. It's just one of those things, and you have to get comfortable with it. I mean, obviously, the panel's really good at it. They're all under 25. But you can, genuinely, you can walk into a room and pick out the CISOs because they all look tired and worried.
The other thing to note is, you have to know when you really need to be present, right? I know I'm terrible. We're all terrible. I'm going to assume we're all terrible at, passing stuff on, right? I think I definitely have control issues. I'm not afraid to admit it, right? So I think that's part of the learning and being okay with I don't need to be in that meeting, or I don't need to do that. Making sure that you can rely on your team and your teammates to do that. I think that's been a big lesson for me.
Okay, questions? Any more?
Budding CISO, was wondering where you think the time is best spent in kind of ramping up, and is it degree, boot camps? Is it just networking events? Where do you think the time is kind of best spent if you have all of the basics, the curiosity, the tenacity, all those things, being security minded, but you don't necessarily have the expertise? Or do you just start looking for analyst positions or that kind of thing?
So for me, it's saying yes to the difficult roles or things that I don't know how to do. Just if someone's like, hey, putting myself out there, I think has really helped me. I definitely have had a lot of imposter syndrome, still have it. Likely will always have it, just because technology is ever evolving, and it's hard to stay with the news and trends every single day, but definitely put yourself out there. Fail fast, move on, and keep on looking. I think what was most successful for me, I do have a degree. Like 17 years ago, I am getting my master's now, but cybersecurity wasn't a degree when I was going to school, but I am 25. But it wasn't. I actually have interns now that have their bachelor's and master's in cyber, and I'm still getting my master's in cyber. But I'm not saying that a master's is the path for you. Everybody has a different journey, and that's okay. I think for me, it was putting myself out there, doing the more difficult tasks, using the Google machine when I didn't know an acronym, or looking at journals and just reading and reading. I was self-taught for a long time, and then on-the-job training. For me, though, also, it's the networking. It's being here. It's socializing with your peers and those online virtually. Hi. But I think it's important, make LinkedIn connections, be present, brand yourself as well. Like, don't let a company brand you, you brand you. Put yourself forward, be your biggest cheerleader. That's really important. Also, what I tell everybody to do, my interns to anything else, is for like 2 weeks, write down what you did every single day, like you're a billable person. Because I guarantee what's on your resume isn't reflective of your day-to-day activities. You've missed something. So make sure that you're able to adequately explain what you do at your job. Make sure it's on your resume and on your LinkedIn appropriately, and just put yourself out there.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that, so don't go the academic route. I mean, for this, I think if you're going to go down that path, I have 4 degrees, so let me just put it that way. And one of them is in cybersecurity and privacy. But the reason why I say that is just with today's job market, you just have to show an interest. And experience is going to speak louder than any degree is going to give you. If you really want to go down the degree path, what I typically, when somebody encourages, I want to get my master's in this, or I want to get a bachelor's degree in this or something, get in something with the business so you can round it out. The technical side is easy to learn. If you need a foot in the door because you don't have a lot of experience, then certainly a boot camp can get you a foot in the door. But don't rely on the certs as the way to profess your expertise. Experience will always trump all of that. And CISOs, hiring managers in this space, be it IT or cybersecurity, are always going to look at the experience first. I'll tell you, I look at resumes all the time. And the last thing I look at is the education credentials. I want to know, what are you doing today in your job? What have you been experienced and exposed to? And is that relevant for what I'm hiring for?
No. The last thing, because I'm not a big advocate of higher education, so it really just comes down to when I interview somebody, it's mindset matters. I'm walking you through scenarios. I'm trying to get to what would you do in this type of a scenario, and I really want to know where they're going, how they would think, how they would act, and respond. I can teach technology all day long.
Okay. So we're coming to the end of our time now. So before I thank the panel, I'd just like to thank all of our sponsors. Give them a round of applause. So I got it. For the sponsors, really, it's not very often, I know I'm obviously in the business myself as well, but it's important for the sponsors to be able to get in front of CISOs and talk to CISOs about what their pain points are, what they're solving for, and try and understand how different vendors and different sponsors can help them. So just real fast from the guys, like, what does it take to get in front of you as a CISO for our sponsors?
Number one, it's going to be timing. Do I have a problem that you can solve? Just because it's a good time for you does not mean it is a great time for me. So that's going to be the first and foremost. Tell me what you do, the problem that you can solve for me, and I will tell you in the beginning, if that's a problem, where I am in my budget cycle. Don't be annoying. Don't tell me you do all things for all people. I am very willing to pick up a phone and to talk. I truly am, but don't lie to me, don't mislead me, don't try to promise me everything, and then don't call me, every single week trying to say, hey, where are we at in this process? Because I told you from the get-go. I've got no budget left for this year. I don't have anything here. I'm willing to take a 10-minute conversation, but again, set those expectations.
Yeah, I imagine we could probably come up with a million things that don't work, like cold calling and emails. I don't know why that strategy is still around. I guess it's like spam. You only need that 1% hit rate, I guess. I think for me is, I think you already alluded to it, is stop trying, the companies that are out there, if you're listening at all, I understand you're just the sales and the marketing side of this, but stop trying to be everything to everyone. I mean, we'll see right through it real quick, right? Focus on the core of what you are, like in any business, and develop that niche, and then tell me how that brings value to it. And timing is everything, right? Do a little bit of research. You want to get on my calendar, do a little bit of research about where we're at, where we're going, what our strategy is. There's enough out there, whether we're private or public, that you can find out, and if you do your research, then that's going to be a foot into the door.
I want you to treat me like I'm a third grader. Why? I literally need to know, who are you? Like, I see a lot of, so I work for a VAR. We have 3,000 partners. So I see about 5 vendor pitches a week. And a lot of times, they're talking for 20 minutes, and I'm like, I have to Google them and be like, what are they actually doing? What is this? I want your first slide to say who you are, your one-sentence elevator pitch that doesn't have machine learning and artificial intelligence. But if that's your thing, then yes, I need that in there. But not every company, I need to know exactly what it is. What is that elevator pitch in 5 words or less? And then I need a why. Why are you different from anybody else? Is it because that you decrease ransomware attacks by whatever? Or you're the best for APT, whatever? What is it that made you special? And I need it in bullet points. I don't need these long paragraphs. I need you to treat me like I'm a third grader. This. And then I may find you interesting, or I may remember, oh yeah, I can do a search in my email, or I can do a search in my notes. Oh, this is what that company does. Their identity and access management, or their whatever, and I can just search it quickly. So keep it simple. The KISS method works for me.
Yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. I think it's really important to know who you're talking to, like that whole research, like tell me you've spent some time figuring out, and it's just not. And then we also talk about, seriously, I don't know who came up with these really cutesy email things that are going on. Just don't. Just don't. Yeah, don't. I don't know where that came from, but just don't.
I also don't need a $25 gift card.
Correct.
Okay, well, thank you very much, guys. It was awesome. I feel smart after listening to you all for an hour, so I really appreciate it. Give the panel a round.